So I started walking to the CEO's office. I didn't tell my boss. My boss's boss was the CEO of HBO. My theory then, as it is now, is that if someone tells me I can't do something, that's usually a pretty good sign that they can't do it. That has nothing to do with me. What was the world going to end?
Let's go.
Welcome back to This Magic Life. Today, I am joined by the extraordinary James Altucher. James is a serial entrepreneur who has started and run over 20 companies and invested in over 30. He is the author of around 20 books, at least, including bestsellers The Power of No and Choose Yourself. He's also a chess master and a stand-up comedian, and he's the host of the incredible podcast, The James Altucher Show, which has more than 80 million podcast downloads. He is a veritable sage of serendipity who has navigated through life's ups and downs with his unique flair. And he has turned the unpredictable into opportunities, which is exactly what we want for you. To say that I am thrilled beyond words to interview this remarkable man is the understatement of the year. James, welcome to This Magic Life.
Andrea, thanks for having me. And I hope my life does become magical as a result of being on your podcast.
Now, why do you say that? Because I feel that your life has been magical, and magical in the sense that you've had the fairy dust and you've also had the black magic.
Yeah, it's true. And I guess everybody has to an extent, right? Like everybody has their dark, not necessarily dark past, but things that have caused them anguish and stress and fear. But I don't know at the same time if everyone has, the we often don't appreciate when things are good. So that's why when things are bad, they're particularly bad because we feel them a lot more than when things are good, we think, oh, this is how it's supposed to be, no big deal. But when things are bad, it's like soul crushing. So I think of magic as living a life that creates lots of stories. So, like for instance, what today will you do that's a story tomorrow, good or bad? And I was just thinking about this the other day, like, what am I doing each day to make sure I have because I have lots of stories because I would actively seek out a life that was story creating. And I wonder if I do that as much now.
Well, I was actually going to ask you if there's a story that you could share from your own remarkable journey, which has had its ups and downs, to inspire our viewers to believe with every fiber of their being, James, that their own career journeys can and will be full of serendipitous and magical twists and turns.
I have some big stories like going broke and coming back from that. And I tell these stories a lot, but I'll tell you one smaller story that's just kind of at first funny. So I had what's called a hedge fund. So I haven't always been in the finance business and I haven't always been in the finance business since then. But at the time I was running a hedge fund where investors would give me money and I would invest the money. And my next door neighbor worked for a very big hedge fund. And he said, you should meet my boss. He would love to meet you because at the time I was writing for the Financial Times. So his boss knew who I was. He said he would love to meet you and maybe he'll invest money in your fund. Because this guy runs $60 billion. So that's a lot of money. And maybe he would invest in your fund. So I go in with my neighbor to his work and his boss meets me and gives me a tour of everything. And we have an interesting conversation. And he finally says, James, what can I do for you? Why are you here? And I explained, well, I'd love for you to invest in my fund. And he said, listen, I'd love it if you worked here. If you want to have a job here, if you want to work here, you could work here anytime. But I can't invest money in your fund. I have really no way to check what you're investing in. Who knows what you're investing in? And, it could be something weird or fraudulent or whatever. And he said, and then he pointed himself, he says, the last thing we need here is to see my name or the name Bernard Madoff Securities, LLC, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And I was kind of got depressed, and I'm like leaving his building, and I'm thinking, man, if he has $60 billion to invest. If even Bernard Madoff, if even Bernie Madoff can't invest with me, how am I going to survive in this business? I don't really know anybody. I don't have a network. So I started the process of ending my hedge fund because of that meeting. I figured I cannot compete with someone like this. And so that rejection kind of forced me to kind of really evaluate my career choices and change careers.
What career did you pivot into, James?
Well, I knew a lot about finance, obviously, and I also was a writer, so I knew a lot about creating content, as we now call it, and I also knew a lot about the internet. My very first business was creating websites for entertainment companies, and you and I before the podcast were talking about our mutual friend. That's how I met him. He was running websites for Loud Records, which for people who know is the Wu-Tang Clan and many other great artists. And so he was a client. I made the websites for the Wu-Tang Clan at that time, among other entertainment companies. And okay. So then I figured, you know what? I'm always very good at combining my interests. So I decided I'm going to get out of the hedge fund business and I'm going to make a website that is like a social media site for investors. And it was called Stock Picker without an E, stockpicker.com. And I combined my interest in building websites with my interest in finance, with my interest in writing. And it was a great site. We had like 1 million visitors a month, and we were profitable from day one with advertising. And I sold the company like 4 months after after I officially launched it. And that in itself was a story how I sold it so quickly. But that's how I pivoted. So meeting Bernie Madoff ultimately made me millions of dollars. Of course, 2 years after that, I was dead broke, but that's another story.
I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later on, but I want our viewers to know that I asked you the question about magic and serendipity because one of the many reasons that I started this show is that I believe that colleges and universities do a decent job, in some cases, a great job, of teaching students subject matter expertise. But they do a very mediocre job, which is being very generous when it comes to preparing students for the reality that they're going to find in their post-grad lives. And by that, I mean the unpredictability of their lives, the fact that you cannot control how your career is going to unfold, whether it's because a Bernie Madoff says he's not going to invest in your hedge fund and then you decide to close it, or because you lose a ton of money, as I know that you've done over the course of your career, your businesses go under, whatever. You cannot control it. And that rather than students, let alone adults, trying to keep a stranglehold on the way that career unfolds, they should learn to kind of surf serendipity.
I 100% agree. I actually would say a little further that I don't think college teaches subject expertise very well, but definitely you're right about, I have several kids who are all in that post college phase. And one just had a birthday, and I always write a note. And I remember, um, when I was 25, I had recently had left graduate school, and I was writing to my stepson, and I was explaining how I was in this giant middle. Like it was like before all the years before 25, I had been in that routine of, wake up, get on a bus, go to a school, take classes, take tests, try to do well, try to get high scores in some way, so I can get to the next thing. But then 25, I had none of that. I had no more, I was done with education. I didn't really have a solid career or job, and everything was still in front of me. So I was in this giant, I hadn't yet succeeded or failed, but I had no more education, which was kind of the way we practice minor successes and minor failures. Oh, you failed a test. It's a minor. It's not really a failure. It's like you're practicing later failures. You get an A on a test, or you get into a school you like. It's a minor success. It's not a big success. It doesn't have that much impact on later life in some way. And so 25 is like this giant middle, and you think you're supposed to know what is the direction you're going to go because you just had 20 years of education sort of pointing you in some path. But there really is no path. I've had 8 or 9 or 10 completely different careers. You know, I majored in computer science, but then I worked for a television company. Then I made websites for entertainment companies. Then I wrote books. Then I ran a hedge fund. Then I I made a website that I sold. Then I became a writer. I've written over 20 books. Oh, now it's time to be a stand-up comedian. Now it's time to be in the self-improvement space, and on and on. You have so many different careers in your life, and some of them are connected to each other, some of them aren't, but you kind of just you can say, well, so many kids say, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm upset. Like I feel anxious. I don't know what I'm going to do. You're never going to know what you're going to do. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Andrea, you probably don't know what you're going to do next year. Like podcast is fine for now. What else are you going to do?
Well, I certainly can't predict it.
Right.
That is 150% sure. I may think I know what I want to do, which is why I tell students just take a first step.
Yeah, that is very good advice. I remember one time, and this also was around, I guess I was 23 or 24. I was I this was when I really had just left graduate school, and I I was unemployed, and I had nothing I was going for, no prospects. I was making and living on $10 a day or $20 a day from giving chess lessons to a couple of kids in the neighborhood where I was living. And my sister told me, it's important, just do one thing a day to move forward. Just do one thing moving forward a day. And that was very good advice that I've always remembered.
I want to actually get into another incredible book that you've written, James. And I want to apologize. I've lost the jacket cover because I
Wow.
didn't want to ruin it.
You know what's so funny? I don't think I've ever seen that book without a jacket cover on it. I didn't
Well,
know that's
there
what it
you
looked. I
go.
didn't know
This
that's what
is
my
what
book
it
looked
looks
like.
like. So this is Skip the Line. And I read it last year and I've since reread it to prepare for this interview. And I want to let
Thank you.
anybody know who is watching this now that it will make a fabulous graduation gift for any student in your life because it basically cracks the code on jumping ahead in your career. James, what does it mean to skip the line, and what is the secret to doing it well?
We're always told for everything we want to do, oh, here's the path. Oh, you know, go get your MBA, go work at Goldman Sachs, go work for a hedge fund. Now you can start a hedge fund. So that's a line. And there's a lot of people on that line taking that path in the hopes that 15 years later, oh, they have their own hedge fund. Or, okay, go to lots of auditions, move to LA, you know, take acting classes, take improv classes, somehow, be a waiter or a waitress, somehow meet an agent, and eventually you might get some roles and maybe even a big role. So that's a line that people feel they have to wait on. And a classic example too is writing a book. So I've written many books and I've waited on many lines. Oh, right, you know, write a book, get an agent, find an editor who likes your book. Hopefully, then the marketing division of that publisher likes the book. Then the publisher has to like the book. Then you have to finish the book, and and maybe it'll do well enough you get to write your next book. So that's another line. And many people have been crushed with disappointment when they never get to the end of they stand on the line forever, but they never get to the end of the line. And so my point really is that don't be so sure that line is for you. That line is maybe for everybody else, but don't let them convince you. Don't let society or others or your colleagues or your bosses or your family don't or your teachers don't let anyone tell you what lines you're supposed to be standing on are. And for everything you want to do, there's the line for other people, but then there's your path, and your path could be very different. So uh you know an example would be, I wanted to make a TV show. I had been thrown out of graduate school for computer science. I had been a failed novelist. I'd written 4 novels that I sent to, hundreds of agents and then dozens of publishers. Nobody even sent me a nice letter back. It was all form rejections. And finally I said, okay, I'm going to move to New York City and I'm going to get closer to where things are going to happen. And so this is in the 90s. I got a job at HBO, and I was working in the IT department. So
Yeah,
my title
you
was
were a junior analyst software developer.
exactly. And so like the IT department was so looked down upon at HBO because we have nothing to do with the HBO, the business. We were even in a different building than the HBO building. And we were the only kind of division of HBO that was in a different building. And but I wanted to make a TV show. And nobody else in the IT department, they were even vague, they weren't even vaguely aware that they worked at the best entertainment company in the world at that time. And they didn't care, nobody cared. People looked at me like I was crazy. And at the time, HBO didn't have a website. So I, that is a whole other story, but I convinced them to make a website. Web was just sort of beginning in the mid 90s. And at one point, and I tell the story in the book, at one point, I figured, okay, I have an idea. What I really want to do is I want, well, I basically, I wanted to describe my idea specifically to the CEO of HBO. So I started walking to the CEO's office. I didn't tell my boss, just to put it in hierarchical terms. My boss's boss was the CEO of HBO.
It's a lot
I
of
didn't,
bosses.
yeah, it was very hierarchical. Every company has a hierarchy like that. And so I started walking to the CEO's office, and I run into one of the heads of marketing along the way. And she's like, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to Jeff Bewkes's office, the CEO." And she's like, "You can't, did you tell Bruce, your boss?" And I'm like, "No." So you can't just walk into the CEO of HBO's office. Like, you can't do that. And my theory then, as it is now, is that if someone tells me I can't do something, that's usually a pretty good sign that they can't do it, but it has nothing to do with me. So I felt like I could do it. Like, what was the world going to end? Am I going to get fired? Like, what's going to happen if I go into now? I have to go to the CEO office to find out what's this amazing thing that's supposed to happen that I can't do it. So I go up to his floor and past the secretaries, go to his office, and he's there, and he looks up at me, and he like is like confused, like, "Who are you?" And I said, "Listen, I'm building HBO's website, and I have this idea. Just like HBO is the best on the planet for coming up with original, gritty, edgy TV shows, let's do original, gritty web shows on the website." And he's like, "I don't care. You do whatever you want. It's your generation. You do it." And so he
You got
really
the
didn't.
green light.
Right. He really didn't care, but he did say enough words to give me the green light. And so I went back to my boss and I said, "Look, I have to do this. This Jeff Bewkes, the CEO, told me to do it." And he's like, "What? You went directly to his office?" But at that point, he couldn't do anything. Like, not only did I go to his office, but I said, "Jeff Bewkes told me I had to do this." And so it was this exciting thing for me where I created this idea for a web show that then the head of HBO documentaries wanted me to shoot it as a TV pilot, a TV show. So I didn't really get on the air, but I did shoot it as a TV show. And I did it for 3 years as a web show. And then other companies started calling me and saying, "Hey, what you did for HBO, can we do that too?" So I started an entire company on the side making websites for entertainment companies, and it became a big company while I still had my full time job at HBO. I didn't leave my full time job for 18 months. I was very risk averse and still am. And but finally, we built up to big enough that I had to leave. And uh, I mean, we did every website for every entertainment company out there, and then eventually I sold that. And for the first time in my life, I had more than $10 in the bank, and it was a very exciting thing. Like my web show was called 3 a.m. and I would go out on a Wednesday night when nobody is out at supposedly nobody's out at 3 in the morning, and I would interview in New York City anybody who I could who was out at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday night, and then I would get the transcripts and design around it and put it up on the internet, and I did that for over 3 years.
I
This
love
3 a.m.
that.
site.
It's an amazing, amazing story, James. I so love it. How do you think someone who's just starting out their career journey, and as so many students are, is afraid of making a mistake, is afraid of picking the wrong job, the wrong company, the wrong industry? How can they take that mindset, James, and get their career moving?
Such a good question. And it's a good question because there's no real answer. I mean, and there's so many I like the one thing is it's really important to understand you can't make a mistake. So, but if I were to give advice on this, which means I'm about to give advice on this, don't do something for the money, particularly in your 20s, because a your career, no matter how much money you make when you're 25, it has nothing to do with how much money you're going to make when you're 35 or 45 or 55. So it's not like your money starts at, oh, I'm going to make 50,000 a year and it's going to every year it's going to go up a little bit more. Some years you're going to make more, some years you're going to make less. Um, it's an adventure. And you're going to also, again, switch careers many times. Uh, almost everybody. I mean, even someone who's a doctor, like someone goes to medical school and then they work at a hospital and then they have their own practice. Okay, but at some point, maybe you go into business and you start buying hospitals, or you work for a company that's buying hospitals, or you work for a medical device company. So now you're an entrepreneur, and like careers shift and change. It's hard to do the same thing for 30 or 40 years. So, or 50 years, however long a career is. But I would say I'll just tell from my own experience, and then you can judge. So I got two job offers at the same time. One was HBO, one was J.P. Morgan, the bank, and to be and both do the same thing at both jobs, junior programmer, whatever. And J.P. Morgan offered me a massive $80,000 a year. Oh my gosh, I had never made more than 20,000 a year in my life. Now they were offering me four times that, and HBO offered me 40,000 a year. So everybody said, "Okay, I guess you're taking the J.P. Morgan job," and I said, "No, HBO is my favorite television channel. I love HBO. I love it. I love all the shows on there. I stay home on a Saturday just to watch all HBO all day long." And so I took the HBO job because I loved it. And I didn't know anything about JP Morgan other than it was a bank and it seemed boring to me. And so I took half the salary to work at some place I loved. And maybe it would have been better. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I would have, you know, made $1 billion working in the finance business if I had started at JP Morgan. But I didn't make a mistake because I had so many adventures, so many stories. You have to redefine what success is. Success, sure, money is related to success because money, if assuming you spend less than you make, money buys freedom. But there are people who make 100 million a year, but they spend more than 100 million a year, so they don't have freedom. And there are people who make 100,000 a year who spend 90,000 a year, and they have freedom. So money is connected to that, but it's not the only thing. and freedom is more important than the amount of money you make. If freedom is, and this is not just me saying this, like the whole field of positive psychology is based on this concept of well-being, and freedom is a component of that, as is community and mastery. And so I figured at HBO I was going to have freedom because I was making still 40,000 a year was like I was wealth, that was wealth to me. I was going to be around people I assumed were like-minded to me, people interested in, you know, entertainment. Like I was trying to write novels and I was interested in doing something artistic. So HBO seemed like a better choice. So it was going to have community and mastery. Like I was already writing all these novels, but they were getting rejected. So I figured, okay, maybe I need to learn something about how HBO creates content and stories, and that will increase my mastery of storytelling. And so HBO seemed to me to be the right choice. It could have been a mistake, but there are no mistakes. Like you just have to try things, and as much as you can, try for go places where you're going to increase your mastery in something you're interested in. You're going to increase your freedom, and you're going to increase uh, your community, the network you have around you, and you're going to be around people you like and who lift you up. So that's maybe a good metric to decide what to do next. By the way, you don't have to do what you're passionate about. Your talents and passions might be different. Maybe you're passionate about playing golf, but you're very talented at sales. You'll enjoy doing sales if you take a job as a salesman. You'll get more passionate about doing the things you're talented at. Even like you don't have to go to a golf company if you love playing golf.
Yeah. No, I was actually gonna say, because to me, what you've just identified is like, that is a passion for sure, but you didn't see where the connection would be between, let's say, playing chess and scaling that or monetizing it or whatever the case may be. And you didn't really want to. I think that your professional passion is something that is discovered by experimenting, by
I agree with
testing,
that.
by iterating. And I actually want to ask you, because you, in Skip the Line, talk about something that you have coined as the 10,000 experiments rule. You say you can't think your way to success, you have to do.
Anytime you're curious about something, you can experiment. So and each one of these experiments leapfrogs your abilities to be in the top 1% of the field you love doing. So I'll give a kind of random example. When I was just starting with stand-up comedy, I got obsessed with doing stand-up comedy, and I ended up doing it for like 6 years, and to the point where I was performing 10 times a week, like multiple times in a night. And uh, and I was traveling all over doing it, and I even traveled to other countries to do it. And but in the beginning, I was like anything, I was just horrible, and I wanted to get a little better at dealing with hostile audiences because I was getting booed, and I didn't like that. And I wasn't. I felt like my jokes were. It was taking me too long to tell a joke. So just like it's taking me too long to tell this story right now, but I decided I'm gonna do an experiment. I'm gonna go on the New York City subway during rush hour when people are trying to get home from a miserable day of work, and I'm gonna do stand up in front of this hostile audience, and I would videotape it and study the results. So I get on the subway with my friend with the camera, and I got scared. I figured there's no way I'm going to do this. I said to her, "I'm sorry, I'm wasting your time. Just whatever." And then I said, "You know what? Turn on the camera and let's just see what happens." She turns on the camera, and I did start doing it. And then every stop, I went to a new car and started doing stand up again. And it was horrible, but it was an experiment, and it really did kind of immunize myself for hostile audiences, and it really did get me a lot more comfortable being in such an uncomfortable situation, like an audience that just doesn't want to listen to you, but you've got to push forward and ignore it and try to be funny. And you got to get this feeling that I'm having a party and they're the ones invited to it. So, but it's my party.
Yeah.
And 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 then I figured, okay, you know what? This experiment reminds me of late night TV. So late night, what is a late night TV show? What's the skeleton of a late night TV show? The host does a stand-up routine and then has on a celebrity guest and a musical guest. That's kind of like the basic structure. And so I figured, you know what? I'm gonna make a version of a late night show that's on a subway. So I found like a musical, like a busker, someone who's just playing drums on a homeless guy just playing drums on garbage cans. And so he became my musical guest.
I love that.
And a friend of mine had just written a best-selling book, so I brought him onto the subway and I interviewed him, and we interacted with the other people sitting around him, and so I put the whole thing together as a video. It was like a half-hour video, and I sent it to an agent at William Morris, and the agent for reality TV at William Morris, and he said, "This is no good." So that was that.
Oh, shoot. I thought you were going to say, and he offered me a show.
No, but that's the whole point is that I did this experiment. It cost me $0. I made a whole late night TV show episode, which was a unique and original concept by combining this experiment I had done with comedy with the skeleton of what a late night show is, the structure of a late night show. I did an experiment. It could have changed my life completely. Like maybe the agent could have said, "This is great," and he could have found some network to put it on, and boom, my life would change. Or what happened is I learned something. I did something. I had this video that I was able to share. I have this story to tell, and I got better at comedy as well. So can't, you can't really fail at an experiment.
Or
What is
you
it?
can. Don't you think an experiment can fail, but you learn from it?
Right. But that's the whole point
That's the whole point.
is that what is an experiment really? It's you have a scientist has a hypothesis and tests the hypothesis. So in that definition, you can't fail because you either your hypothesis was either correct or incorrect. And now you know. That's why you do the experiment is so that you know and that your body of knowledge increases. There are more things now that you know than at post experiment than pre experiment. And so by doing lots of experiments, you learn lots of amazing things that nobody else knows. And that's a kind of experiment.
Totally. And I think this is the mindset and an approach to use as you are figuring out what works for me, what lights me up, where do I get the most joy in my career, in the type of job that I'm doing, what
Right.
industry do I like? And for those people, though, James, because there are some out there who would say, James, you're super creative. You come up with a million ideas. I'm not somebody who's creative. I want to share part of the story and then I want you to pick up on it because I think this is such a beautiful way to become more creative. You just went for a walk in New York City and you stumbled on this like restaurant supply shop that had a bunch of stuff they were selling. And one of the things they were selling was a box of waiters' notepads, those things where the waiter scribbles down or the waitress scribbles down what you've ordered. And it was $10 for 100 notepads. And something, your intuition said, buy the box, James. What did you do with it?
I took this one waiter's pad and I went to this cafe and I just started writing ideas down. Like I remember my first, so I would write 10 ideas a day. And my first idea list was 10 ideas for books I could write. And then, oh, that's kind of neat. And then maybe I will write one of these books. And then the next day, I kind of picked one of the books that I had written the day before. And here's 10 chapters in that I could write if I write that book. And then the next day, I took one of the chapters that I liked the best, the idea of, and here's 10 things I could mention in this chapter. And then the next day it was, oh, here's 10 businesses I could do. Here's 10 investment strategies I could do. Here's 10 people I admire. Here's 10 ideas for one of those people. And after a few weeks, I realized that I was actually excited for the first time in years to get up in the morning and write down and go to a cafe and write down 10 ideas. I was really excited about it. And I started talking to people about my ideas, like, and they would say, "Oh man, if you wrote a book like that, I would read it." And so I was getting excited, like, really? And they're like, "Oh, that could even be a series, that book." And so I was getting excited about some of my ideas. And suddenly, even though my financial situation had only gotten worse, it was getting worse every day. I was actually happy. I wasn't even thinking about my financial situation. I was thinking about these ideas and could any of them be a potential opportunity for me? And and at one point I wrote down a list, 10 people. So I became obsessed at different points with investing because I had lost all my money investing. I wanted to correct the situation. And so I was reading lots of books about investing, and I was writing software to help my investing. And this is when I became a day trader. And so I wrote down a list of people in the investing world who I wanted to meet. And so then I sent emails to them. Can you please meet me and I'll buy you a cup of coffee? Nobody responded.
Yeah.
It's not like Warren Buffett is going to like call out to his secretary, like, "Oh my gosh, somebody named James Altucher wants to buy me a 60-cent cup of coffee. Cancel everything." Like, he just, nobody responded. So then I started writing, well, here's 10 ideas for Warren Buffett. And I would send, here's 10 ideas for so and so. Here's 10 ideas for so and so. Like, I would use the whole idea is that I realized we have these idea muscles. And just like any muscle, it atrophies. You can't use it if you don't keep practicing. If you don't walk for 2 weeks, let's say you're in a hospital bed for 2 weeks, you're sick, you'll need physical therapy to like walk again. It'll be hard for you to walk again. So a lot of us, and myself included, let our idea muscles atrophy, and then it's hard to be creative. We're all creative at heart, like, but it's because we've let this idea muscle atrophy. So what was really happening was I wasn't coming up with good ideas, but I was exercising the idea muscle, and suddenly it was growing, and that's what made me excited. Like, all these neurons in my brain woke up maybe after years of not being used. And so I figured, okay, I'm going to write ideas for other people also and just send them these ideas. So to the people I initially wrote and said, "Can we have coffee?" I wrote, I came up with ideas for each. I researched them and came up, and this was like an experiment. I researched these ideas. I came up with ideas for each person that I thought were good, and I emailed them. And people would often ask me later, like, "Well, what were these emails like?" And there wasn't anything special. I said, "Look, I really, for each person, I said, I really admire you and what you do. Here's 10 ideas that I think fit your strategy, or your career, or whatever." And I said, "There, you have no obligation to respond. I'm really just happy to send you these ideas. Please don't even respond." And 3 people responded out of 20. And one was a famous finance writer. I had sent him, "Here's 10 ideas for articles you should write."
Jim
And
Cramer.
yeah, it was Jim Cramer. And he said, "Wow, these ideas are fantastic. Can you write them?" And so it was after years of writing, it was the first time I was paid to write. And then that led to writing for the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal. I mean, I write about finance to this day, and I've written books about finance. And now I've written many books about other things other than finance. So that started me. I framed this $200 check I got for writing the first article for Jim Cramer. And another guy responded who was a big hedge fund manager, and he said, "Oh, these are excellent ideas for investing." He said, "Why can you come over for dinner?" And we met a couple of times, and he allocated money for me to invest, and that's how I started a hedge fund. So two entire career paths came out of some of those first lists. And amazing things have happened to me ever since, like magical things, because of these. I mean, every day I write 10 ideas a day.
This is
So,
22 years later. You've
yeah,
been doing it every single day. And I want to remind our viewers that this all started at a time when James was feeling the worst he had ever felt in his life. And
yeah.
he listened to his intuition, to his gut. How has your intuition shown up for you, James? What does it feel like in your body or in your brain?
Intuition, meaning like,
I need
um,
to buy that box. I need to do this. I'm gonna try that.
I think if something seems like it'll lead to an interesting or unique experience, a story, then my intuition says yes. And I'll admit, sometimes when I'm feeling down, it's harder to pay attention to that. Like, I have to be a little bit afraid because it has to be unique enough that there's a little fear there. Like I always say, I don't publish an article unless I'm a little bit afraid of how people are going to react to it. Because if I'm not afraid of what I'm saying, then someone else has probably written this, and there's no reason for me now to write it. So for everything I write, I have to be a little bit afraid of to hit publish, or else I don't hit publish. And that's led to sometimes some very viral, not necessarily in a positive way, reactions to some things I've written. Sometimes very positive, sometimes very negative, sometimes both.
It sounds to me like what's at the heart of really piquing your intuition is curiosity.
Curiosity and a little bit of fear. There's got to be there's got to be a fear of the unknown. Like, okay, a lot of people go on roller coasters, and I already know what that experience is like. I'm not interested in doing it. But if like, I don't know of anybody who did stand up comedy on a subway. I was scared to death to do it. I had a feeling it would improve my comedy, and at the very least, there would be a story to tell. So there was a lot of things going for. Okay, and it costs $0. Like, it shouldn't be the case that, oh, I'm gonna climb every mountain in the world. Okay, yes, that's an interesting experience too, but it costs a lot of money, and not everybody could do that. When I think of experiments, I think of experiments as being very cheap. A scientist who has a hypothesis, he doesn't then spend $1 million to do an experiment. He just does it in his lab the next day. I mean, if you think about it, almost everything, like, think about
A
like
banana,
corn.
a corn, yeah.
Yeah, like, how did they that is the result of an experiment. Who would have think that, somehow they planted some stuff and this plant comes up and it's got all these weeds around it? Who would have think that peeling that and eating it would be anything?
Well, I think also with the hybridized food, that is for sure. And I would not recommend eating a lot of the biogenetically engineered food for one. James, I have 2 final questions to ask you, and these are questions I try to ask all of my guests. What can our viewers and listeners do right now in their lives to become more magical, to experience more serendipity?
Well, absolutely, get yourself it doesn't even have to be a waiter's pad. Get yourself some pads. And you know what? It should be like a waiter's pad. Like, don't buy an expensive notebook in an expensive notebook store and start and to make your idea list, because then you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Oh, it's a little too precious. Get like something down and dirty, like a pad a student has, or a waiter's pad, and start writing 10 ideas a day. And it has to be 10, because every day what I notice is, and this still happens to me even though I know it's going to happen, 1 to 7 is very easy. Oh, I'm going to come up with 10 ideas for business. 1 to 7 you'll come up with because you've already been thinking about them, or you have ideas already. 8, 9, and 10 is what you're aiming for. Like, that's where you're sweating, your idea muscle is sweating and it's working. Like, if you do 5 push-ups, that's no problem. But if you do more push-ups than you normally do, that's when you build muscle. So I mean, almost every day when I get to the eighth idea, I count. Am I at 10 yet? I must be at 10. And oh no, I only did 7. So I have to 8, and then I count again. Like, that must have been 10. No, it was the eighth. So you got to do 10 to sweat the muscle, and if you can't do 10, you've got to do 20, because you're putting too much pressure on yourself if you can't do 10. So relax the pressure and do 20. So uh, uh, and they don't have to be good. They're going to be bad ideas, by the way. You're not going to come up with 3,650 good ideas a year. 99.9% of your ideas are going to be very bad. And it's not about executing any of them. Execution ideas are just a subset of ideas. So even execution requires you to have a strong idea muscle. It's not true that ideas are a dime a dozen. execution's everything. Execution itself is a subset of ideas. So write 10 ideas a day and do it at least 2 or 3 weeks, and you'll know. I promise you will notice a difference. There is no way you won't notice the difference. And it's so simple. It takes 15, 20 minutes. Just do it. That's the that's the best thing.
Hey, listen, one final question,
Sure.
James. Looking back on what has been an incredibly successful career journey, what do you think has been the secret to the magic that you've experienced thus far?
I think again, this ideas, but even before I was writing ideas, I had a lot of interesting experiences. I think choosing experiences that are interesting, like how I chose to work at HBO instead of JP Morgan. Like don't think you have to go on the path that everyone else is going on. Like do the things that are interesting to you and don't listen to anybody. I mean, you can listen to people for advice and maybe I should have done that more at different points, but really choose experience over money, over education, because experiences are going to give you more education than other things. And I again, like doing these experiments, magic happens. Can I tell you one more experiment I did?
Of course.
One time I was looking on Twitter, as one does, and this was like in 2018 maybe, and the president of the United States, Donald Trump at the time, tweeted out, "I want to buy Greenland." And the prime minister of Denmark actually tweeted back and said it's not for sale. And I'm thinking, what did I just witness? Like, did can you even buy a country? Like, did the president of the United States just make an offer to buy an entire country? And what does Denmark have to do with this? Like, does Denmark have something to do with Greenland? And so I did a little bit of research. And first off, Denmark owns Greenland. I didn't know that. So this tiny real country owns like one of the biggest land masses on the planet. And I learned all sorts of other things, like why would Trump want to buy Greenland? I thought it was just like, a big mountain of ice. But apparently, it's number two to China as a source for rare earth minerals, which are incredibly important for making semiconductors, powering the electric grid, and all sorts of other things. So, and it turns out that the company that does mine all the rare earth minerals in Greenland, it's called Greenland Natural Resources, something like that, is owned by China. So China really is kind of grabbing all these incredibly important minerals, and they pay Denmark a lot of money every year to have that right. So I could see what was happening. So I decided, well, what if I buy Greenland? And Greenland obviously is going to cost billions of dollars. I don't have that. So I started a Kickstarter. Well, actually, Kickstarter didn't approve it. I think it was Indiegogo or GoFundMe, one of these, but let's just call it a Kickstarter because people understand what it is. So I started a Kickstarter to raise money. I had never done any kind of crowdfunding campaign. I had never done anything with Kickstarter or GoFundMe or Indiegogo. So I wanted to learn about how to do a crowdfunding campaign. So I started a Kickstarter, or again, I think it was Indiegogo or GoFundMe. I started a crowdfunding campaign to buy Greenland. I was going to raise $100 million to buy. That was the goal of the crowdfunding campaign because I figured that's enough for a down payment. And I had to do the research. I listed all the reasons why one would want to buy Greenland and help the people there. It's also got if it was a country, it would be the country with the highest suicide rate and the highest
Mhm.
alcoholism rate. And also I figured no one country should own all the world's rare earth minerals. But then on a Kickstarter campaign, you also have to have rewards. So if someone donated $100, I would give them, 1,000 acres of land. If someone donated $1,000, maybe they would become an earl in Greenland. If $10,000, you'd become a duke. $100,000 would be a national holiday named after you. On and on. And I launched this, and it started raising actually thousands of dollars, and and GoFundMe, ultimately shut it down. They wrote and said, we know you're kidding, but we don't want to get the chargebacks on the credit card fees, and we didn't want to pay the money, and so So that was an experiment in, I had never done a crowdfunding campaign, so I learned all about that. I had never researched Greenland, so I learned all about that. But really, the experiment was in writing. So I write an article every day, and there's lots of styles of writing. Like you could write in the first person, I did this. You could write in the third person, she did this. You could write in the second person, you did this. You can write in the epistolary form, which is letters back and forth. Like I could write letters to my daughter, and I could pretend what kind of letters she would write back, and that could be an article. And so I wanted to write an article that was structured like a crowdfunding campaign. So I took that crowdfunding campaign, and it was an experiment in writing. I did it as an article in crowdfunding format, and so it was it was a variety of different experiments, all in one very cheap, fast experience. So that was another example of an experiment, and it gave me a great story and gave me a lot of knowledge.
I could literally talk to you for, I don't know, maybe like the next 5 months. James, uh,
Only 5 months though. Not after that.
no,
Yeah,
I mean like consecutively
I see.
with short breaks for sleeping.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe like the bathroom and some other personal things that we need to do. But truly, I could keep you on for hours and hours and hours, but I want to just first of all tell our viewers to please sign up, follow James's podcast, The James Altucher Show. It is what you've just witnessed here and so much more. It's James going on, and it's James and his amazing guests, and James and Jay, who's his amazing producer. And you just have to subscribe and follow it. The next thing I
Thank
want
you.
to say, James, is just so much gratitude to you for making time to share your experiences, your trials and tribulations with me and the This Magic Life community. And I want to wish you, your kids, your wife, many, many more magical moments to come.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate you asking me on the show. It's been so much fun. I really enjoyed reliving all of my miserable memories of the past 25 years. And but no, you really asked great questions, and it got me really thinking about education and how does one kind of create these experiences in life. And uh thank you so much for having me on.
Let's go.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of This Magic Life. Our mission is to inspire you to stop fearing your future and start getting excited about all the serendipitous and magical opportunities that await you. Make sure to subscribe to This Magic Life on YouTube so you don't miss any new episodes. And for on-the-go listening, give us a follow wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. We absolutely love to get feedback from the This Magic Life community, so make sure to drop us a comment on YouTube or a 5-star review on Apple. And you can always find me on LinkedIn at Andrea Koppel, aka the Career Magic Maker. I can't wait to see you soon.